Hey guys, today I'm coming to you directly from the beach, probably many, many miles from where you all are. We can do that through the innovation of communication through the cell phone. Back in the old days, we used to communicate on phones like this, where you had a rotary dial, where you had to dial the number by spinning the dial, and you had to talk to an operator before you could talk to somebody else. God has talked to us in different ways throughout history. In the beginning, he talked to us through the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. After the giving of the law, he talked to us through the high priest. And after the death of Jesus, he now talks to us through his word, through the Bible. We, in turn, can talk to God today directly. We can do that through the tool of prayer. Now, Mason said you guys have been studying prayers of the Old Testament, and that's awesome. Today, I want to talk about the prayers of David. Now, David was a man after God's own heart, which meant David was a prayerful man. He was a faithful man. He always looked to God for guidance and gave thanksgiving to God. Today, I want us to look at a specific prayer David prayed in Psalms chapter 3. It's a pretty short prayer. It's only 8 verses, but it's very, very deep and impactful. Let me give you some background about this prayer. At this time, David was the king of Israel. Now, if you remember, David was the little boy who defeated Goliath, who was a big giant. David did that, and eventually, David rose to the ranks to be the king of God's nation, God's people, the king of Israel. So at this time, David has been the king of Israel for a little bit, and he is overthrown by his own son, Absalom. Absalom comes in and takes everything that David has built through God. David ends up having to leave Jerusalem, or he is for fear of his life. So he and a small band of his people take things and they take off and leave Jerusalem. And as David is leaving Jerusalem, this is the prayer that he prays. And at the time, at the beginning of the prayer, David thinks, it appears that God has turned against David, which that's not the case. But it appeared so many bad things had happened to David that others thought that God was against him. So David asked for a couple things in this prayer. One, he asked for God to be a shield about him or around him. Now, guys, if you know what a shield is something that soldiers used to carry in front of them to protect them. So David is asking for God's own protection. And the way that the words are used in Psalm 3 is that he is saying, God, protect all about me, not just in front of me, but behind me, beside me, above me, and below me. Be my protector. And David also asked God to be the lifter of his head. He recognizes that with everybody around him, he asks for God's protection and that God can lift up his head. He recognizes God's power in those two things. And lifting up one's head means that God lifts us up. He sustains us. He carries us through times when things are bad. So David is asking for God's protection. Then on further down in the prayer, David says he went back to sleep. He lied down to sleep. And he awoke and he said God had sustained him. So David had confidence in God's protection. He knew that God was going to protect him, that he was able to lie down and sleep. And David said, I will not be afraid. Because I prayed for God's protection, I have the confidence that God's going to take care of me, and I will not be afraid, even though a whole bunch of people surround me and are trying to take me down. At the end of the prayer, if you look at the first of the prayer, and the prayer is I would challenge you to go back and read Psalms 3. The prayer only is 8 verses. It's very short, but it says a lot. At the first of the prayer, David is down. And at the end of the prayer, David seems to have gotten his confidence back. He's feeling a little bit better. In verse 8, he says, salvation belongs to the Lord. So in the end, he recognizes that the only way that he's going to be saved is through the Lord. Salvation is from the Lord. And he adds one more point. Your blessings be upon your people. So David, after recognizing that God is his salvation, that he will only be saved through God, he asked for the blessings for God's people. Now, those are two very different things there. Is the recognition of salvation through God, and God will save us. God will answer our prayers. Now, he doesn't always do that in the ways that we think he should, but God does answer our prayers. Then when David asked for blessings, David has the assurance of God. He's sure that he has the confidence of God. He asked that God bless his people. So he thinks about others. And I think that's pretty significant. It's because sometimes when we get so down and things bad happen to us, it's difficult for us to think about others. And we need to think about others in prayer because bad things happen to everybody all the time. And one advantage of being a member of the church is that we are a family and that we can all lean on each other and we all remember each other in prayer. So if you'll go back and read Psalms 3, it's a great lesson and a great snapshot of David's prayer life. Just to recap, David feels like everybody's against him. He's on the run from his son. He's lost his kingdom. He prays for God's protection, number one. Number two, he prays for God's confidence, or he states God's confidence. He knows that God will give him the protection that he's prayed for. And at the end of the prayer, he recognizes that he is going to be saved through God. Salvation is from God. And he takes the time to pray for others. I think this is a great lesson to encapsulate what we need to be about as people of prayer when we pray to God. Guys, I hope you will go back and read this. We'll pray for you, and please say a prayer for us tonight. God bless.
Thanks, Mr. Rick. Just like Mr. Rick said, David is known as the man after God's own heart. David did many amazing things in his life. He killed a giant, fought and won many battles, and he was a good king to the people of Israel. We also know that he often talked to God. Psalm is the longest book in the Bible. Most of it was written by David. And Psalm is a book of prayer and praise to God. Many of his psalms ask God for protection, like in Psalm 3 that we just learned about. And many of them tell God how wonderful and marvelous he is. All right, so your challenge this week is to check your mail. Everyone's going to be receiving a different Bible verse from Psalm this week. This is your memory verse. Your challenge this week is to write down, or have a family member write down and decorate your verse. Then memorize it. I'd love to see your creations, so you can share them to our church Facebook page or send me a message. All right, guys. Good luck. Thanks for listening.